Hi everyone, it's Katie and welcome back to my channel. Today it is favourites time. I love my favourites videos. These are so much fun. I love sharing with you guys what I've been up to, stuff I've been enjoying. It's a whole mishmash of basically just a summary of my life over the past month. And I have quite a lot to talk about because my last favourites video I actually filmed closer to 6 weeks ago. So I have some decks, some books, and a lot of other stuff to catch up on. So let's just jump right into it. I think today we will start with decks. I have one tarot deck, and that's the Dark Days Tarot, which probably doesn't surprise very many of you. I've been a little bit obsessed with this deck for a few months now, and I actually just recently did a review on it. So if you'd like to hear my thoughts in depth, check that video out. I also did do an unboxing when I first got it. So there's lots of Dark Days content on this channel apparently. I just love this deck. I really, really love it. And I've been using it pretty much exclusively as my tarot deck anyway, for quite a while. It is a black and white deck, as we can see. And I love it. I love these cards. It's really quite unique in a lot of ways, I think. Obviously with the bicycle and other things, there's fairly like modern depictions, but also quite surreal almost maybe depictions of things as well. So there's a lot going on in this deck, and I just think it's a really, really beautiful, interesting interpretation of the tarot. And for me, it's just been such an easy deck to read with, which I spoke about in my review. It's also just been really supportive, I suppose, and encouraging for me, and helpful. I've had a lot going on, good stuff and challenging stuff. Sometimes the good stuff is the most challenging stuff. Now I have just two oracle decks. The first is the Awakened Soul Oracle by Katey. This deck, I love this deck so much. I have done a review on this actually as well. Awesome guidebook. I love this little book. So I suppose I'll leave some links to reviews and things below if you're interested. I love these backings. So pretty. This deck usually lives at my mum's house, but I've kind of stolen it off her. I don't know, when did I steal it off her? Not too long ago, but I've kind of just been trying to get as much use out of it before she decides she wants it back, basically. So I've been spending plenty of time with it. And again, this is just a deck that's really nice to work with. It definitely has like a feeling of Katey. I don't know whether that's just because I've met her and we've all watched her a lot, and like when I read the guidebook I read it in her voice, and I think, you know, she was a creative director behind the making of these cards, and I think her voice really comes through. So I don't know whether I kind of just picture Katey talking to me and helping me out, and kind of encouraging me and giving me a bit of a push in the right direction, which I quite like. But I just think this is a beautiful deck, and I really like the guidebook. It's really, really clear, gives you some, it's not a lot of information, but the way it's structured and delivered is really just awesome. I think it's great. I think Katey really hit the nail on the head with this one in a lot of ways. I really, really love it. And then we have the Australian Wildflower reading cards by Sherilyn Darcy. I love this deck. I really quite like Sherilyn's other decks, but this one remains my favourite. It was the first, I'm not sure if it was her first oracle deck or it was just my first of hers, but it was one of her earlier ones anyway. She's since published just the Wildflower reading cards, which is kind of, you know, flowers from all over the world, which I do also have, and I have given as gifts several times. And then she also has the Flowers of the Night reading cards. But this one, I think this one is the most special to me, and perhaps that is just because it's Australian, I'm Australian. Connecting with the Australian earth is always really important to me, especially in paganism. You know, there's a big emphasis on connecting with the earth spiritually, which is part of, well, maybe one of the main things that I was drawn to paganism for. But a lot of the literature, a lot of the discussion, the dialogue is really Eurocentric around paganism. So kind of having these tools that I have available to me in the form of a few decks that I love, like this one, that kind of help me connect with my environment. And cards are obviously a tool I use a lot, so having those Australian tools in the form of cards is really special and awesome to me. And these are some of my favorites. And Mum and I actually went to Seven Sisters Festival recently, which is another one of my favourites, and I did a vlog of actually. And it's kind of just like a, you know, weekend festival just for women out in the bush. And I decided to take this deck along with us, and it was just beautiful. Like every morning Mum and I would pull a card each and kind of read out the message and discuss what we thought they meant for each other. And it was just really, really beautiful. It was always really spot on and helpful. I've always found this deck to be very helpful, insightful. So I've kind of continued using it since we got back, and just really enjoying spending time with it, because it's not a deck that I use all the time, but when I do use it, I'm always just really grateful that it's in my life. Okay, now for things I've been reading. I'll start with two easy ones. The Fiddlers Green is this kind of periodical zine, a magazine, indie magazine that gets released every so often. I just received my new one actually, so that might be in my favourites next month, we'll see. I tend to take my time going through those, but they also publish these pamphlets, which are kind of just, you know, one of the articles from perhaps one of the older editions of the magazine that's now unavailable. They'll reprint as just these little pamphlets that are like, I don't know, like 10 or 12 pages. Yeah, and they basically just have one of the articles that was originally in, you know, one of the old magazines, but I didn't get the first few. I was a little bit late to the party. So when these come out, I like to pick them up. And so I think I have 5 or 6 now. And like they have the really cool little illustrations and things that were created for it originally, for the first publication. But it's very much in the same vein as a lot of the other, like it just feels like the Fiddlers magazine, just a bite-sized piece. So the first one was 9 Defenses Against the Basilisk, Black and White Magic for Surviving Extreme Anxiety, which I loved. I loved this one. Obviously I have generalized anxiety disorder, have struggled a lot with that sort of stuff. And I love how Clint, is it Clint? Clint Marsh, yes, does this a lot, kind of drawing parallels between old mythology but lessons we can learn and use today. Like that's kind of a thing that happens a lot in the Fiddlers Green. So this pretty much, like if you don't know what the Fiddlers Green is about, that's a pretty good, I don't know, summary I suppose of the sort of thing you can expect. And Our Bogies, Our Shelves, The Magician's Library as Mentor, Companion and Oracle, which was kind of about bibliomancy really. So yeah, these were really great. I loved them both so much. They only take like 15 minutes to read. I'm a slow reader, so that might be faster for you, I don't know. But I always really enjoy them. And I think these two actually might be some of my favourites of the ones that I have read, so that was fun. Okay, now books. I finished Rebecca Solnit's Field Guide to Getting Lost. I loved this so much. This was the second book that I received for the Life's Library Book Club, which I've signed up to obviously. And so every 6 weeks or so I get a new book, and this was the second one, and I loved it so much. That's what you see, these are kind of like the letters that come with them from either John or Rosianna. This book, I actually didn't realize it was non-fiction. I just kind of think I assumed that the book club was going to be fiction. I don't know where I got that idea from, but I did. I just assumed we'd be getting fiction. And so when this book arrived, I didn't really read a lot about it. I just kind of dived right in. And the first few pages, I was like, God, this is pretentious and preachy. Because, you know, it starts with someone sitting at a dinner table and then they start quoting like old philosophers. And I was just thinking, you know how some young adult novels, John Green does border on this sometimes. I think he's aware of it though. Where they kind of start acting really super intellectual, these characters, and like quoting philosophers. And it's just like, people don't do that in real life. Like sit at a dining table, you know, quoting Plato. I mean, maybe some people do a little bit, but I don't know if that makes any sense. My point is that for the first few pages, I hated this book because I thought it was pretentious and obnoxious and all of those things. And then I kind of clicked onto the fact that it was actually non-fiction. It was more memoir, discussion, philosophy of itself. And then I settled into that and then I loved it. So perhaps that's showing my own ignorance, and I don't know, I felt a bit silly, but I really, really loved it. It kind of covered everything from like art history to, you know, immigration, like just a lot of different things. And then obviously Rebecca Solnit brings it back to, I don't know, just this theme of getting lost and finding yourself or not, or what that means. And it, she talks about that literally getting lost. For example, I think it was one of her relatives while immigrating to America just got lost and they never saw her again. Or a lot of the time it's more figuratively, emotionally, or, you know, in terms of our personality and not knowing who we are and that sort of thing. And the third book from the Life's Library I did actually read as well. It's We Crossed a Bridge and It Trembled, Voices from Syria by Wendy Pearlman. I read this in 24 hours and it was heavy, but I loved it so much. Syria's and the issues in Syria, the ongoing problems in Syria, the civil war, whatever you want to call it. I've been like aware of what's going on. I have kind of made acquaintances through some activism I've been involved in who are refugees from Syria. So I know kind of about the human impact to an extent, but I'm by no means an expert. And I didn't really know, I kind of knew what started the civil war, but I didn't know kind of more of the historical context and also kind of like how it developed, I suppose, in terms of the experience of Syrians. So this is basically, Wendy Pearlman has obviously, she's the author, but I wouldn't really, I don't know, perhaps that's not the best term for her place in the book. She writes a really thorough introduction, which takes up like 30 or something pages, so there's a lot of her in there. But then basically the rest of the book is just short testimonies from people from Syria, people who have fled Syria. And it is just kind of like, she explains in the introduction that what she's done is basically try to create a narrative from, you know, start to finish. I'm not very good with my words today. She's tried to create this narrative, I suppose, through the testimonies that she's taken from Syrians. So she's kind of taken parts of their testimony. It's not like, you know, full on, because some of these, she said she did interviews over days with individuals. So these are just kind of snapshots of what these people have said, and they're placed in chapters and in an order that kind of helps us travel that journey with Syrians, I suppose. And obviously, you know, Syrians, they're not like one. They don't all have the same thoughts and feelings about the whole subject, but the majority of these Syrians obviously oppose Assad and the regime because they've fled. So that's kind of the main story. I think there was one or two that supported Assad, but for the most part, that's the narrative we're given. But I think, as she says, you know, that's Syrians haven't historically been given a voice of their own, especially, you know, even in topics that very, very directly involve them. And so that's what this book at least tries to do in some respect. So it was really intense. Obviously a lot of horrible trauma, death, torture, all of that, first-hand accounts of all of that sort of stuff. And I liked what John said actually in his letter. What did he say? He said, "We Crossed a Bridge and It Trembled is itself a trembling bridge between the reader and the book's authors. Through these stories we can listen better and imagine more complexly. No country is a shithole and no community is monolithic. Syria was a vibrant, well-educated nation with a large middle class when the conflict began. It was also an impressive totalitarian state in which the government used torture and intimidation to retain its power. The complicated isn't simplified here for narrative's sake. Instead, we see a progression of how a world can fall apart. But we also see something else, how people go on. I found this book upsetting and infuriating and heartbreaking, but I did not find it hopeless." I really liked that, and I read this briefly before I read the book, kind of returned to it after I read the book, and I think that pretty well sums it up for me. I had a very similar experience. I didn't have as much of the hope. I don't know that I would call it hope. Perhaps there is. It's not directly, like, the people in this book don't speak about having hope. I think some of them maintain a sense of defiance. And that's inspiring, I suppose. A lot of them wonder, you know, whether the revolution was worth it, whether involving themselves in this revolution was worth it. And I suppose they're kind of divided on that. Some say that no, nothing is worth what we've been through and what we've done to our country. But a lot of them say yes, you know, the possibility of freedom is always worth fighting for. So I think it was that. I didn't find a lot of hope in terms of a resolution for Syria. I more found hope in terms of the resilience that these individuals had and a commitment to their purpose, their values, their vision. This is a book I would really encourage people to read. It really moved me, and I feel like I learned a lot. Like, it wasn't just a I don't know, like war porn, conflict porn, where I just get to feel sad and at the state of the world. It really put a face and a voice to people who often don't have voices, talking about their own experience, which is something I've spoken about, I'm super passionate about. There's only so much I want to hear about a conflict in a place from outsiders. There's only so much I want to hear about race from white people. There's only so much I want to hear about disability from able-bodied people. Do you know what I mean? I want to hear from the people who have had that lived experience about their thoughts and feelings. I want to know what they think should happen. I'm very grassroots oriented in terms of, you know, my values and how I think the world would be a better place if we listen to people with a lived experience. And that's what this book is. And then I also read Foreign Soil by Maxine, Beneba, Clarke. Now I have heard of Maxine, and I've actually had, I know she wrote the book The Hate Race, which has been one of those books that I've always been meaning to get and to read, just never have. She is an Australian author. She is, where does it say here? Maxine Beneba Clarke is a widely published Australian writer of Afro-Caribbean descent and the author of the acclaimed memoir, The Hate Race. So I kind of knew of her, but had never read her work. This I picked up one day. I had a few hours, like something happened at work, and so I had a bit of extra time for my lunch break. So I went to a bookshop, because what else am I going to do? And I found this book and it jumped out to me. And basically it's a bunch of short stories, I don't know, about people in places or situations that aren't, or where they don't belong according to other people, or, you know, foreign soil. Like, I think that's a pretty good title for what this is. So it's a collection of those stories, and the reason I picked it up basically is because the first one is set in Footscray, where I live. So I think in the story, the young woman is a first-generation Australian Sudanese, and she ends up having a conversation with a refugee from Sudan. So it's kind of like a look at, we hear from both of their own perspectives, how they kind of view each other. So it's just a really interesting look at these two very, very different experiences that are only one generation removed. So that was super interesting to me, and just having it set, you know, like around the corner from my house was really cool. There's another story about a asylum seeker. He's a young boy, he's a Tamil, in the Villawood detention centre, which is in Sydney, which is kind of, aside from our offshore detention centres, that's another one of our very notorious refugee detention centres. Refugees are treated horribly in Australia, especially those that come by boat. So it's kind of, it follows this young boy, I think he's about 16 or 17, we don't really know, coming across on a boat and then ending up in Villawood for a year and a half, and just how broken he is. It's heartbreaking, but it's a really beautiful book too. So this had me crying, but also just not wanting each story to end. It was just one of those collections where just a couple of pages in, I was fully immersed in whichever story I was reading, and I did not want it to end. And so the fact that it only lasted 20 or 30 pages, I just kind of was like, every time, it's like when we get a new doctor on Doctor Who, you just don't want the doctor to go away, you don't want him to regenerate, you don't want a new doctor, and then we get a new doctor, and it might take you a little while to fall in love with the new doctor, but then by the time it's their time to leave, you don't want them to leave. It kind of felt like that with each story. I didn't want it to end, but then I fell in love with the next story just as much. And so there's stories from all over the world. There's some set in America, there's some set obviously from Sri Lanka, others in Africa, a few in Australia. So it's just kind of, there's one in London as well, or England somewhere. So I have read a few other things, listened to some audiobooks and things, but those three would definitely be the standout books for me in the past month or so. So now I just wanted to talk about some other things that I've been loving, some media stuff. And then also I'll talk about some of the things I've been up to. So I finally watched Sex Education on Netflix. I loved it so much. I watched it all in like 2 days. I'm a bit of a binger. I don't watch a lot of TV, but when I do watch something, I watch a lot of it. And I enjoyed it so much. I just think the way that it discussed sex in such a positive way, and there were so many different experiences of sex and relationships in the story that were all just as valid as the others, and the portrayals of those characters were so good. And for a while I was kind of sitting there watching the main character going, you are so familiar, those eyes, and then it clicked that that was the young Mordred in Merlin. has the same eyes. They're beautiful. We're getting a BTS comeback very soon, next month, which I'm so excited about, obviously. But just yesterday or the day before, we had our trailer release, which was Persona by RM, which was really cool. And I hadn't really paid too much attention to all of the kind of details coming out beforehand, but when this came out, and you know, it's called Map of the Soul, he's talking about Persona and the shadow, it's like, wow, I'm pretty sure RM's been reading some Jung. So this is going to be really interesting. Like, BTS have very themed albums and usually trilogies. So this one is going to be really psychotherapy and like bloody Jung. I thought that was so interesting. So I'm really, really looking forward to this comeback. Plus it was just catchy as hell. RM's great. At the end of February, after I filmed my favourite video, Mum, Dad and I went to see Pseudo Echo at Crown. And I had so much fun. Obviously, I've spoken about Pseudo Echo like 4 or 5 times now. I love Pseudo Echo, and whenever I can and whenever they're in Melbourne, I do try to go and see them. They're just this Australian band from the 80s who just, I mean, they were never really big. I don't know. I mean, they had a few hits, but they just really good on stage. Like, I don't really listen to a lot of their music, you know, just at home, because it's good and I like it, but just they have a thing going as far as performing live, and so I just love going. Mum and I have been to see them a few times now, and we took Dad because we knew he would love it, and he did. And they played like AC/DC and the Nutbush and everything as well for their encore, and it was just so much fun. But supporting them was Tanya George, who I've never heard of before, and she was basically just this really awesome female performer who had a looper. And that is where, you know, she'd record part of her voice and it would loop over, and so record a bit more and she'd build it up. And so she would create these songs on stage literally just using her voice.
Where will we go? Where will we go? Where will we go? Reality, I don't ever wanna be. What makes me sad to see is what we blame.
And she was amazing. Dad fell in love. He was obsessed. So we actually went up and got to meet her after the show, which was really cool, and she was really lovely. And then it turned out the week after, when Mum and I were going to Seven Sisters, she was at Seven Sisters Festival. So we got to see her again, which was really awesome. And Seven Sisters was really fun. Mum and I try to go every second year, and it's kind of like a thing for Mum's birthday because she just loves it, and it's a good excuse for us to go away together. And I did do a vlog, so I won't talk too much about that, but I will say perhaps my favourite part of the weekend was actually the bushwalk that we did, which is kind of at the end of that vlog. We did a walk, where was it? It was like the Briars bushwalk at Mount Martha. And it was about a 3-hour walk, I think. And it was just lovely. I was trying to get, there was some kookaburras, and I was trying to get like a shot just of them laughing. I just wanted to hear them laugh and put it in my vlog for you, because I love kookaburras. Everybody loves kookaburras. But I feel like they're the tricksters of the bush, and they were doing it on purpose. As soon as I'd turn off my camera, they would all laugh. I'm like, you fuckers. So I'd keep walking, and then we'd hear them and we'd feel like we're getting closer. And then they'd be laughing, you know, way behind us, so it wouldn't really pick up on the camera. It was, I was like, yeah, they were messing with me the whole time. The whole time I was trying to get just a little bit of a kookaburra laugh, and I couldn't. So that was quite funny. But other than that, it was just beautiful. There were so many paperbark trees. I don't think I've ever seen so many paperbark trees, and the way the light was hitting them, it was amazing. It was such a beautiful day. I think I've also mentioned, maybe in my Q&A or something, actually no, it was in my Dark Days Tarot review, that I've got a new job. I managed to score a job at my favourite bookshop here in Melbourne, which was so exciting and unexpected. It kind of came out of the blue. I kind of had just put it out there that I wanted a job that, obviously, that I liked. I already love my current job, but it's a little bit all over the place because I work in universities, it means that there's a lot of the year where I don't have a lot of work, which is fun, but also means it's not great for the bank account. So I just kind of put it out there that I would love to have something that was a little bit more steady, a few days a week. And I've always wanted to work in a bookshop, but I've never even worked in retail. So I thought it was, you know, I'd kind of missed my opportunity. But then my favorite bookshop put up on their Facebook that they were looking for someone for 3 days a week. And I threw in my application thinking I wouldn't even get a call, got an interview, got the job, which was just amazing. So I'm there 3 days a week, which means I'm surrounded by esoteric and occult and pagan books and all of the books and so many tarot decks. And it's so much fun. I'm having so much fun there. Although it's a little bit hard not to come home with a new book every day, especially with, you know, you got a bit of a staff discount. And already this week, I brought 2 books home this week. Like, what is wrong with me? I've already finished one of them, but it's still, I'm going to have to be pretty on top of that, I think, going forward, which is kind of like the best problem I could ever have. March is also a pretty big like month in my calendar, I suppose, because I have my mum's birthday, my brother's birthday, one of my best friend's birthday, and also it's my sober-versary. So March is often quite an emotional month for me as well. So as of about 10 days ago, I am 6 years sober, which is insane to me. And I often get really quite emotional around that time. I had to do one of my BTS speeches, which is when I go and talk to schools and stuff and share my mental health story, a big part of which is alcohol dependence and getting sober. And I sobbed. Like, you know, it's okay to get a bit emotional, but I was just like a wreck because it was 2 days before my sober-versary. And I think I just realized this year that there's, you know, people are like, yeah, but aren't you just proud and happy? And it's like, yeah, but also there's this memory of, you know, why I decided to get sober, and it was because of a really horrible thing that happened. And then there's also the kind of then what happened in the few months after that, and that I got really unwell and attempted suicide 2 months later because alcohol was the only coping strategy I knew. So this kind of month is always quite, I don't know, there's a lot of emotions for me, really, really good ones and really kind of difficult ones. But this is going to be a really long video, so I think I will leave that there. This is the majority of the stuff that I've been really enjoying. Obviously, I've read some really great books this past month and been up to some really cool stuff. March is one of those months that, you know, brings up a lot of really, really cool, fun things for me to celebrate, but also some of those more challenging things to reflect on. But ultimately, it was a great month. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too. So thank you so much for watching. I'll chat to you guys in the comments, and until next time, so much love. Bye.